mechanism where we would try to guesstimate what it would be the next year. And it's really easy when we have collective bargaining agreements in place because we know how much our personnel costs are going to be for the following year. But like this year, we're still in negotiations. So, so I have no idea what my actual costs for 2021 will be because we haven't negotiated 2021 yet with the employees. Their contract expired on December 31st. It's very common practice that the contract times out and then we get it negotiated sometime after the first of the year. So, so what we did instead, and your city manager probably pointed out the new provision in the contract where we talk about if you opt out, you pay up to that point plus our added cost for that year. So what the county did, part of the partnership is we took 2020 actuals. Was it 2020 actuals, Commander, or 2020 or 2019 actuals?
2020, Sheriff. So
okay.
The 2020 contract carried over to 2021 as far as the rate.
Okay. So you kept the same rate for 2021 as you did in 2020. When you go to 2022, you will have 2021 actuals as your number in 2022. What that does is that creates a structural gap in the county's budget that the county has to cover, right? Because our costs for 2022 are greater than what we're charging you in 2021. Or we're charging you 2021 rates.
Got it.
And in 2022, and our costs are greater than that. That's why we have that added bullet in the contract that if you opt out of the contract, you have to make up that difference.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Whew. I'm glad one of us got it. So, I guess with all of that, I would stand for questions. You know, I just summarized what took me 30 years to learn in this. And some of you have heard this before, and some of you are newish. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Sheriff Cameroud. We appreciate it. And I want to say, again, welcome to Commander Willeen, who's with us tonight. And he sounds like he's the guy who keeps all the beans in order.
Yeah.
Counts them and keeps them in order.
Yes, he does.
Fantastic.
And if you have questions about the contract or the rates or the workload or whatever, Commander Willeen is probably your best source for that. I know most of you will work through your city manager to get those questions, but not all of our contract partners have a city manager. So everybody gets the same pitch. Mike is the guy.
All right, terrific.
All right.
Council, questions for Sheriff Cameroud?
I guess I just have questions relating to communications. And going back to 2001 and the change to unencrypted, and now we're transitioning back to encrypted. And I know the storyline for why it went unencrypted to interagency communications now going to encrypted for sensitive information being given out and other calls and other things like that. I do believe it's still imperative on interagency communications with our fire and our EMS to be able to have a conversation with our contracted services. So I'm just hoping that we can get to a point where we do, even if we have to pay for the radio or the encryption, whatever it might be, that we have a way to communicate 2 ways real time without having either to wait for a call or to call to dispatch or call to wherever we would have to call. Because I know unencrypted can't go into an encrypted system, but an encrypted system can call into an unencrypted. So I just want to make sure that we have our fire and our EMS and the people that do respond that have easy access to communicate with you and whomever the deputy is on duty that day or for whatever given situation. And those are things I think any community would hope for and ask. So
yeah, that's a fair point, council member. There's a lot of misinformation out there about the encryption process and what's going on with that, and as well as the rationale for it. At least what I'm hearing through the informal rumor mill channels. What I will say is the radios have never been encrypted in Carver County. When we went to 800 megahertz, there was no scanner capability in the private sector. So it felt like it was encrypted in the private sector, but the signal was never encrypted, but for some operational stuff. Fast forward to today, it is my belief, based on everything I know about how people were using law enforcement communications in times of civil unrest. It is also based on significant payment we paid out related to an alleged data breach that included radio traffic as part of the litigation. The protecting the data and encrypting it is the appropriate course for law enforcement data. We will always have the capacity to communicate directly with all of our partners in the public safety world in an unencrypted way. They don't have ability to tap into and monitor the law enforcement channels. But the channels where we use to communicate back and forth, those are unencrypted, and they will all be able to communicate on those, just like they do now. In fact, your fire department does not today communicate with us on our law enforcement channels. They communicate with us on our joint ops channels, and then we have one where we kind of like it's a squad car, fire truck, car to car sort of thing. And so none of that is changing at all.
Okay, thank you.
Council, other questions?
Do you have a question? No? I'm still trying to figure out how we decide how many police officers we need to cover our area in a safe way.
Sure, yep. So it really is as simple as the math behind it. And we joke with Commander Wallin because we're cops, we're not mathematicians. So we're like, math is hard. But the reality is we know, for example, how many calls we go to in Victoria. We know how, because we have years of data, we know how long the average call for service takes. We know how many, on an average, how many calls for service generate a police report. We know about how long it takes to generate or to write a police report. And so we are able to take all of your numbers, figure out how much on an average time is spent on calls for service and writing the reports that go along with them. And so if we know that that number is X number of hours, we know that your average employee who is assigned a 2,080-hour work schedule actually has about 1,800 hours in a police car. And so when we look at the amount of time we spend on calls for service writing reports, I talked about that's a third of the time. So you take that number, multiply it by 3, and then you have the number of hours they spend in the squad car, and so you can figure out how many employees it takes to meet that call volume.
Okay, so each year when we do our contract, do you go over that and make a recommendation?
Yes, we do. Yeah, okay. Commander Wallin does that analysis each year. And then you have some room to flex, because remember I talked about that, the unobligated time where you can get into community issues or specific community things. You know, that number is kind of squishy, right? It could be more than a third of their time if you wanted it to be. Some communities want a lot of proactive type policing and community engagement and things like that. Well, that eats into that time. So if the city decides they want more than that, why, we can add that in. And you can squish that down a little bit too. You can't squish it down to 0, but that's the one that has give and take. The call for service third, that third there's no give or take on that. That's how many calls you get. The admin time, there isn't a lot of give and take in that one either, because that's a fixed thing. my employees have to do timesheets and go to their sexual harassment training and all of those other admin tasks. But there is flexibility in that one. And so Commander Willeen makes a recommendation based on all of that data on what those numbers should look like.
Okay.
Any last questions for Sheriff Cameron before we wind up for today with him? Thank you so much again, and thank you, Commander Willeen, as being somebody who's mathematically challenged. I appreciate it. So thank you.
During contract time, we wear sandals to the office. All right, thank you. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. All right. With that, we are going to close out the work session. We're going to take a few minutes to get set up for our council meeting, so join us back here again at 6:30. I need a motion to adjourn the work session.
Make a motion to adjourn the work session.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.